Welcome to Prime Suspects, alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr. I'm your host, Matt Landis. Today's topics: the NFL Draft and the Prime Sports app, a bettor's dispute with Caesars for more than $350,000, and the new ban in Illinois on credit cards to fund gaming accounts. Kicking it off with the latest from Inside Prime Sports, a two-parter this week. Part one, the NFL Draft. Adam, last week I picked up on a sentiment from you that you're much more open than most operators to booking the draft. How'd it go for you this time around?
We lost.
Wow, expansive answer.
Compelling and rich.
No, I mean, from the very first draft pick to, it was an obliteration. So you knew it was coming. There was no keeping it to a minimal. The punters won that one.
All right, well, Joe, your Eagles might have been victors in another sense as well. I'm wondering what key takeaways you may have aside from your Eagles once again seemingly getting a steal late in that first round.
You know, this draft was supposed to be a kind of subpar draft, talent-wise, depth-wise. I'd like to thank Shedeur Sanders and his family for being one of the most interesting things about the draft, albeit not at all in the way that they thought that they were going to be. You know, all those folks, I mean, it was easy cash in anybody who was getting down on Shedeur Sanders to be in the first round or like the first, or even the first pick. Boy, I would have loved to have been taking the other side of that, because it was funny how last weekend seemed like it was the first time anybody heard that he wasn't coming off well in evaluations. On top of that, I'd like to thank Mel Kiper for choosing the weirdest hill for his career to die on last weekend. I've always hated that guy. And he will now be, I think, in the dictionary next to the word irony for a guy whose parting shot was, the NFL hasn't been able to evaluate quarterbacks for 50 years. And this is a guy who thought, for instance, like Jimmy Clausen was going to be a friggin' legend in the NFL. Some of the guys who he graded out as some of the top quarterback draft prospects ever are guys who would have a hard time making the night shift at Home Depot right now. So, and it all goes back to like the great thing about this event is that, with the exception, I'd say, of the number one pick this time around, that seemed to be our foregone conclusion. There's not much once you get past the first, we'll say like 3, 4, 5 picks that anybody knows anything about. There's so many players, so much to do. I think the really impressive thing is how the broadcasters and commentators, all the way down to like the 6th round, like all the way down to Mr. Irrelevant, when they talk about these guys on film, it's like, oh, I really love this guy. He's really athletic. And like how they just talk in like such bland generalisms, like, oh yeah, watching that. You didn't watch a fucking minute of tape on this guy or anything like that, but they try and sound like experts. But that's kind of America, isn't it? Whether it's grading draft picks or talking about sports betting or anything, everybody's an expert, right? I guess it's no wonder we lost money on the draft this week to a country full of experts. But one thing's for sure, Cleveland now has the most interesting quarterback room in the NFL.
And from grading draft picks to grading and also placing bets, let's also dive in a bit to part 2 of our first segment this week, the Prime Sports app experience. Adam, you've been engaged in recent Twitter discussion, highlighting issues some users are having with Prime's app, and you've previously noted a focus on improving the user experience, but it's been a while since we've touched on it here on Prime Suspects. So what would you say about how the efforts are going to address the feedback you're hearing from your players?
I mean, it's been slow. The difference is, and this is where I'll be the first to admit, I generally don't like a lot of the apps. I think Bet365 to me is one of the worst UIs in sports betting world, but so many others have loved it. And I haven't been on it for probably about 5 or 6 years, but I've had, 30 plus accounts banned from it over the last 20 or whatever. But for me, the Prime Sports app is actually just very clean and easy to place bets. But generally we're learning that's not necessarily what people go onto sports betting apps for, is to just simply place bets. They're looking for, some flashy colors and a few other things. The things that we've been running into are actually technical and actually somewhat simple. Bunch of it is X-point with the geolocation, whether it's on our side or their side or, whose side, I don't know. That's what we're sort of digging into to see why players are getting errors as they place bets. simplicity things of using, your iPhone's Face ID, remember your password, things like that. In Ohio, that's all fine. In New Jersey, there's actually restrictions of have that available. However, all the operators have it available, and there's sort of a balance of you just put it up and wait for the result to come and deal with it in that nature, or, how do you balance that friction that the regulators kind of put in front of you a bit as well. So we're sort of learning on some of these aspects as we go along. And I mean, I'll be the first to admit I've ridiculed and blasted and called sports books all kinds of names over the past 30 years. And I don't mind getting that in reverse sometimes. And one of them was a player, I think it was Wizard, that was just getting simple errors that should never happen, posted it. We got guys in a separate one room once it sort of landed on our desk. And then it was like, I'd sort of seen Prime Sports' canned response and thought, let me add a bit of color to it and say, what else is there? What other feedback can we get? And I think most of the responses were appreciative of a sportsbook actually saying, how can yous help us get this product better? Now, that's just the only way to do it for us. And the feedback was, we love the product, but the app's shit. Okay, so now let's sort of having a conversation of what do we need to do this? And there's a lot of things coming along, and a brand new UI that should roll out mid to late May, hopefully sort of answers some of those things. But I know it won't be the perfect experience, as some of the feedback was, all the apps are shit in New Jersey kind of thing. So there's a balance of just the communication and understanding that we're here, we are here to hear the issues that players are running into, because ultimately that's our niche. Our niche is the customer service, the white glove service, the black Amex kind of thing that Joe sort of pushed in the beginning. Like, we know that it's not perfect and we know there's going to be flaws along the way, but give us a chance. Let's have some back and forth and let's make this thing better. That's the goal at the end of the day.
So Matt, what I would say, just really quickly weighing in on this one, and to kind of echo something of what Adam said, to make an analogy, I would rather be a restaurant with great food and shitty ambiance than be a restaurant that looks great setting with shitty food. As long as the players are saying like the part that they love, which is, let's remember the business we're in. We're in the business of selling bets. We're in the business of selling wagers. As long as the players are happy with that part, we can bridge, Prime can bridge, Beckers can bridge the distance between that and making the restaurant setting a little better. But, if you have the best setting, if you have a crappy wagering product, if you're getting stiffed, if you're getting shut down, if you're getting limited, all those things, it doesn't matter how glossy or slick the app is. The thing at the bottom, the thing at the root of all of this, the product, selling wagers, that's not going to make up for it. So it's not easy. It's, I guess I'll echo the 76ers, trust the process. If there's one thing, though, that I think that we've shown is that, when somebody says something, whether it's on Twitter or whatever, we're there. We don't run away from that stuff. We turn into that stuff. We run into the dissatisfaction, the displeasure, and we want to hear these people and we want to make things right. But as long as players are saying, like, I like the concept, I like what you guys are trying to do, I like that I'm able to get down, we're still heading in the right direction.
Well, Joe, speaking of dissatisfaction and displeasure, we'll go ahead and pivot from the user experience at Prime to a dispute making news between a bettor and Caesars, our water cooler segment this week. A Chicago area bettor named Thomas McPeek placed a lot of parlay bets totaling approximately $30,000 at Caesars' Horseshoe Casino in Hammond, Indiana. As chronicled by Elihu Foystel on Medium, when some of these bets won, Caesars refused to pay approximately $352,000 in winnings. For added context, McPeek placed hundreds of small parlays throughout kiosks, mostly on college football, and when kiosk printers jammed, Caesars staff manually printed his tickets, verbally confirmed the wagers would be honored, signed the tickets, and had him complete tax forms. After initially validating his bets, Caesars, however, told him they were voiding all his wagers, claiming he violated rules against repeat betting. While that's true, Caesars seemingly knew about the violation, but still affirmed the bets were valid. leading to the argument they can't void bets after seeing the outcome. Now, the Indiana Gaming Commission has sided with Caesars, stating they followed internal rules, but Elihu's article suggests that in a court of law, McPeek would likely win his case, as Caesars can't free-roll a player by waiting to see if bets win before deciding to honor them. Joe, how much of this is a case of a savvy gambler finding a loophole versus a casino unfairly changing its rules after the fact?
So what I'd say is, because the regulated industry in the United States still new, everybody's feeling, trying to find their way. There's still an awful lot of, angles that guys find to shoot, and that's fine. Okay. I think the trouble with this entire thing is that there's no single party you could say is like totally glazed with glory on this one. It's not the operator, it's not the player, and it's certainly not the regulator. I think the issue that has to be addressed is, okay, you have gambling law, and you have gambling regulations, and yet the thing that seems to be deciding this is something that is internal only to the operator, and that's their house rules or their internal controls. And that's something that, that's leading to the confusion. It seems like an operator can write their rules as they see fit, okay, that it may not be adhering to the law or to the regulations, something like that, but is essentially their choice. And they can create these scenarios where they can basically stiff people and say that, well, that's our rule. And this is obviously going to create a lot of confusion and dissatisfaction with players, with consumers, and also with the media, because this thing's been picked up. I think right now, Caesars is getting more than $325,000 worth of bad press. But Caesars, they're deciding they're going to hold on to this. As far as Elihu weighing in, I know Elihu has had a long history with Indiana gaming regulators. So I think you got to take that into account. But there has to be really a reconciliation in states, in these markets, between what is lawful, what is permitted under the regs, and then what is permitted by the operators with their house rules. And you could argue that in some states, in some states, the operators get too much latitude to change things on the fly just based on the arbitrariness of their house rules. Okay. Is there a way to make this fair? Yeah, it would mean the regulator getting a little more involved, getting a little more granular, going a little deeper into these scenarios ahead of time instead of being responsive, being reactive. In some ways, the Indiana regulators, their hands are tied by past precedent. Like, they've always ruled in favor of the operators based on their house rules in the past. So if they didn't this time, the operator might have cause to, the operator themselves might have cause to bring a complaint. So this is a really shit situation, and unfortunately, it's a growing pain. I think the player is getting treated pretty badly, and in some ways, maybe Caesars ought to take this as a $325,000 lesson in how to tighten up their systems, better train their staff, and also, you know what? The free roll thing is entirely accurate. Caesars basically taking a person's money and waiting to see if he loses. And then when he doesn't, when he wins, and they decide they're going to cancel it, then that just does not sit right with people. And it never will.
And Adam, Elihu also calls out sportsbook risk management as a contributing factor here, due partly to the fact the bets were made through kiosks rather than online. With that in mind, how do you think risk management differs in retail environments? And what, if anything, could Caesars have done to better manage its exposure on these bets?
Move the fucking line. I mean, it's no different than taking a betting line or on a kiosk. I mean, they're seeing it real time. I've bet on kiosks. Lines move. I mean, it's pretty basic bookmaking 101. Yeah, unfortunately, the regulators, I don't believe, are really educated deep enough to sort of understand how they should deal with a lot of these things. The rebetting thing, I mean, these days the books have so much shit in their T&Cs and they're 2,500 pages long that there's just all kinds of things to sort of cover their ass instead of doing their job, which ultimately leads to, it's not the first time, I'm sure it won't be the last time that we have a story like this. Just pay the person. You got caught with your pants down. Just pay the player. I mean, that's just the part of the game. That's what the kiosks are. I mean, most of the kiosks, yeah, the limits are so small. But if you're going to do that on the kiosks and make the limits so small, then make sure you have your risk management team with their bet ticker at least on an amount where they're checking these bets that they see come through this, or maybe have your software company develop some kind of automatic risk management, auto trading. It's pretty simple, but Caesars are big and bad, and they'd be trying to find a lawyer to just take this to court and shove it up their ass. But that's just me versus the others. It's unfortunate, but this is what the big gaming companies are doing, and the regulators just don't have the people, I think, internally that can look at something like this and truly understand the spirit of the game, or, they're just looking for whatever the terms and conditions are to cover the one taking the bet's ass when they should be just making an example of him and making them pay. No doubt if this was in a Massachusetts, Caesars would be paying this player. This is the difference, I think, as well, with regulator to regulator, that you're dealing with 50 little countries within the big, landmass. So it's unfortunate, but they can get away with it, so they try it until they can't.
Yeah, and again, to Adam's point, like, regulators all right, this is a shit situation. How do the regulators go on from here? All right. Do they look at this and they say, like, you know what? Yeah, based on past precedent where we've allowed operators to more or less let their internal rules and regulations be the final decision on these things. If they say, like, oh, well, in the past, okay, well, we've had to do that, so unfortunately, well, it sucks for this guy, we got to let it roll. But then how does the regulator follow up? Do they say, like, but going forward, this is what we're going to do, and there has to be corrective action, okay? Everything that we do when it comes to getting a license, proving our software, getting it tested, all of these things, when we go to states and regulators license us, is to prove, in part, that we're not screwing their customers. But when it's something as simple as a policy that a customer gets screwed, and you know what? The guy found an angle to shoot here right now. Okay, he's not the first guy in history, but they didn't Q&A it out. They didn't anticipate it before. They should be paying $325,000 probably to this guy to be their essentially third-party Q&A team, that he found a wrinkle in their system. I mean, for God, when the printer didn't work and the counter staff was manually printing the stuff for him, how much more do you say about this? Okay, but it's how do regulators respond now? It's not enough to just let this thing sit. Regulators have to come out of these types of shitty situations, and they have to, add to their regulations. It's additional work. They're already overworked. I get it. But some of this stuff, it doesn't need, New Testament length regs in order to cover it. But they have to be proactive and do corrective action when this stuff arises.
And to tie this all together, a jump ball question for you guys based on what I've heard from you, Joe, referencing policy, Adam mentioning terms and conditions. It seems like this calls into question the dynamic of the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, which we've discussed before in the context of past posting. In this case, how much, if at all, do you think McPeek may have been violating the spirit of the law, even if he may have a sound case when it comes to the letter of the law?
No, fuck that. He placed bets. He gambled his money. They put up a number. They took the bets. That's how this game works. He did what he was meant to do. They didn't do what they meant to do. End of story.
Yeah, I mean, the one point that Elihu makes about, look, this is essentially a contract. When Caesars accepted the money in return for the wager slip and the terms of what a payout would be on winning, that's an enforceable contract, okay? It'd be interesting to see if this does go to litigation, how that piece of this is treated. Are wagers contracts? They are. I mean, at least in my opinion, because you're paying money, consideration, in return for a potential result. So I don't know how, I'm not aware of anything in contract law. And granted, that was the only class I took in law when I was in college. And while I did get an A, it was kind of summary level course. But I can't think of any other contract where when you have a legal and binding contract by all terms under the law, but at a internal rules and regulations or policy where that basically gets to waive off what is in essence a legal contract. I can't think of anything. Any of you lawyers out there, there's a couple of you, if you can think of a similar situation, another example, I'd really be interested to hear it, because this is the gaming industry is the only one that I ever hear this one in.
Yeah, and to keep myself honest here, listening to you guys, I think you could just as easily frame this question as whether or not Caesars is violating the spirit of the law rather than McPeek as the better in this equation.
Nobody's, pristine in this thing. Not the regulators, not Caesars, not the better. But then again, gambling is not a pristine business. So let's stop. Oh my gosh. Somebody dirtied their white gloves. Holy shit.
This is pristine. It's investing. All we're doing is investing. It's no different.
It would be great if it was. I agree with you. It would be great if we just treated this like the financial market that it is. Oh shit. Somebody from Couch is going to start briefing based on what I just said. It would be great if we did that. But we know the reality isn't. We treat gambling like something specific in this country that has a moral component to it, right? More so than anything else that you're going to see. And yeah, okay, so do we fight to change that? Well, they've been fighting for a couple hundred years, and there's still a certain segment of our population that thinks that gambling is for scumbags. We're never going to prevail on those merits. So the fact that you have, three imperfect actors in this, it's what is the reasonable negotiated result? The regulators clearly had a hole that they hadn't patched. The operator clearly, did not make good on a financial contract that they accepted the terms of, and that they would have been more than happy to collect this player's, the losses on this one. And the player knew he was doing something clever. Okay. Happens every day. It's happening right now.
With that, let's go ahead and shift gears, but stay in the Midwest with our look ahead segment this week. The Illinois Gaming Board is changing its policy on sportsbook payments, adopting a proposed rule banning credit cards to fund gaming accounts for online sports wagering. As reported by Justin Byers of SBCAmericas.com, this would make Illinois the 7th state banning credit cards for sports betting. Adam, how impactful will this rule be on handle at sportsbooks currently accepting credit card deposits?
So I'm going to agree with this one, and I don't think even if it does have an impact on handle, it's a negative one. The credit card versus the debit card, and especially with the way that these banks, and since moving and spending time in the US and getting, the social security numbers and addresses, and you get like 2 or 3 a day of these credit cards from all kinds of spectrums landing in your mailbox. It's quite insane and quite predatory. So this is one where I don't sort of really care about the downside of the handle on these things. I think credit cards in general, while I'd rather use those than debit cards for protection in, what you're spending on and whatnot, the predatory state of credit cards in the US is quite insane, having experienced it a great deal in the last 6 months. And it's just not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that people use debit cards over credit cards. They use what they have, not what they're borrowing. And then on top of that, they're, anywhere between 19 and 40% to whatever these cards sort of get you in the end. It's, there's a lot of things that I'm against when it comes to the responsible gaming movement and things that they're trying to do and those kind of aspects. Banning credit cards isn't one that I'm going to die on the hill fighting against, because it's actually not a bad move.
Well, Joe, I feel like we just got a 2-for-1 from Adam, eloquently answering my question for him, as well as the question I had teed up for you. While we know this proposed change is being made with the intent to protect players and promote responsible gaming, from your perspective, if we consider a spectrum ranging from truly meaningful to mostly symbolic, how much of a tangible effect do you see this having on player protection?
I do think it's more than symbolic. When you do look at the terms on credit cards, especially for younger players who are probably the ones who are, like me, when I graduated from college, I got my first Visa card with a $500 limit. I thought I was Nelson Rockefeller, but I think I was paying a pizza off on that card at 24.1 APR until, sometime last week. Accessing the card networks for debit cards, I think is okay. Credit cards, no. Let's stay away from that. More so because of how it affects younger people's consumption. The other thing is, for us, for our business, I've not been in the Prime HQ office in some time, but when we looked at like what our average first time deposit was, it was at a level, well, one, it was significantly higher. It was like $2,500 compared to the rest of the industry, which is $50 or less, I think. It's a different kind of transaction. Nobody's making a $2,500 deposit on a credit card with us. We were doing definitely less than 10%, it might have been less than 8% were actual credit card transactions. Credit cards are the biggest goddamn pain in the ass to set up for payments, okay? The PCI compliance, everything. It is an annoyance using credit cards. On some level, I would like to think that operators would look at this and say, like, thank you, Illinois. We really do appreciate that. We'd love to throw that shit out and go to, wallets like PayPal, ACH, bank wires for you big whaley type people. And if they want to do something, quick for people, hey, let's start pulling, crypto in here, guys, stable coins, not Bitcoin, right? But I think it's probably a bad message nowadays, particularly when we're looking at responsible gaming and especially the younger players, to do anything more with credit cards. So I'm totally in favor for Illinois.
And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this week's episode. To the audience, no credit card necessary to keep enjoying this show free of charge. Thanks as always for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.